All right. Happy Saturday to everybody. Give me some ones in the chat if everybody can hear me good. Hear me well. I don't know. Something like that. Make sure everybody can hear me before we get started. Good to see everybody. Thank you for coming in. I think this will be an interesting topic tonight. Coming to you live from Austin, Texas. Can everybody hear me? You wanted the best history podcast online. Well, they couldn't make it. So this is what you get. Yeah, I think we're doing all right. Right? Everybody can hear me? Still looking for some ones. So we got something cool to jump into tonight. I've got it kind of lined out loosely. We'll go through it. This will be fun. Nice, cool. Pennsylvania Plowboy. Good to see you, man. Hope everybody's having a good weekend so far, loud and clear. Cool. All right. So the operative question tonight is whether Daniel Boone was in fact a Shawnee spy. Before you watch this, I should, caveat this again. If you haven't watched our Daniel Boone episode, go check it out. Again, I think it was a cool story on the siege of Boonesboro. So listen to that or watch that before you watch this, because that's kind of a precursor to this. But if you have watched it, you'll kind of know that I tucked in there this underlying story where a lot of the settlers who were around Boone were curious, suspicious that he was a spy. And you know what? Actually, too, I'll link the Boone episode in the description of this episode. And any episode I talk about, I'm going to link those in the description as well. So going forward, I'll be doing that. Anyways, I digress. A lot of settlers, and a lot of people in Boone's life were kind of giving him a hard time all the time. And I think my end conclusion is, haters going to hate, right? At the end of the day, death, taxes, and haters are going to hate are three certainties in life. And I'm going to break down my case for Boone not being a Shawnee spy, and break down some of the suspicions, which are not totally invalid. They're understandable considering the circumstances. But yeah, we'll go into Boone's life, his background with the Shawnee specifically, his motives in building a frontier settlement, and his time with the Shawnee, because he did build a legitimate bond with these people. So without further ado, Boone was born. I have to look a lot of this stuff up in my notes, right? It's in and out. November 2nd, 1734. He's a Pennsylvania boy, a lot like Crockett's upbringing in that he was born, in this kind of territory. He grew up legitimately hunting and trapping and doing all these things in the wilderness, because Pennsylvania was the western edge of the territories at the time. So he's born in the, let's check that, the early to mid 18th century. The family eventually moves to North Carolina, and this is a common kind of diaspora that happened from the Northeast southward. Again, like a lot of this stuff, it's just because it was the land that you could get. It was the land that you could at least ostensibly afford. So the Boones relocate to North Carolina in 1755. So he's 21 years old. He serves in the French and Indian War, which is a super overlooked conflict. It's where the French worked with the natives against the British. There were some horrific battles, and so many of our founding fathers, so many of the people who were critical in founding the country participated in it. It's like the Mexican-American War in that it was a precursor for all of these generals and critical figures in the Revolutionary War. The Mexican-American War it was a shaping ground for so many generals who fought in the Civil War and would go on to shape the country in the post-Civil War eras. So Boone he's involved in the war. He's not a soldier. He just wasn't cut out to be a soldier. He was notoriously kind of free-spirited, which worked for and against him. But he worked as a wagoner and a scout, which, again, kind of a parallel with Crockett. They're too independently minded to be a soldier of much effect, right? They're not going to last long at that job. But they're great as frontiersmen, great as woodsmen. So they're super valuable being able to go out and scout the territory where they're not going to get caught, right? They know how to move in the territory without being detected. And that's a super valuable skill. So they were utilized for that. But a lot of these guys saw pretty horrific things in this war. And it certainly tinge their outlook moving forward. There wasn't a term PTSD at the time, and it may well have been a different manifestation of those symptoms, let's say, but they certainly kind of lingered in the back of a lot of these guys' mind for moving forward in their life. In 1756, he gets married to Rebecca Bryan, and they end up having 10 children. Not super uncommon on the frontier, but notable. Then he moves into it out of necessity. You have 10 kids, you got to find a way to provide for them. And a precursor to the mountain man was the long hunter. And it's not something that's entirely new to history. There is um, a precedent for it in European history and in several cultures' history. But what really differentiated these guys from their predecessors was the actual length, the long hunter going out for weeks, going out for months at a time, hunting commercially. The target of their hunting was white-tailed deer because it was the term buck comes from buck skin. It was the frontier currency at the time. You could get a lot of them. Their hides were useful for just about everything. Let's look at the chat real quick. 10 kids. Wow. Yeah, I don't I don't know what religious background they had, but you know, it's indicative of all backgrounds on the frontier because look, they love their kids. They want to have many of them and have a fruitful, happy life, right? But they also need labor, and a lot of them didn't survive infancy. So it's this kind of crude math game where they need lots of kids to survive, and then lots of kids have to be provided for. So that's the tough situation that Boone is in. He becomes a long hunter, goes out for months at a time, builds a substantial reputation for he's a skillful guy already. He has all the requisite skills of being a long hunter. So they go out in the Appalachians, they go out into the Cumberland Gap. It's really kind of the cutoff point for civilization at that time. A lot of people couldn't or wouldn't go past the Appalachian Mountains because it's just simply too far out there. They're a physical barrier that you have to cross that a lot of people don't have the skills for, and there's literally no path. So somebody had to blaze that path. And after his long hunter days, he's got this reputation build up where people will follow him. He joins up with a guy named Richard Henderson, who's really a prominent political figure, and they formed the Transylvania Company, and which is like, I guess there wasn't the connotation of the vampires at the time. Transylvania Company goes out into the wilderness, though, and Boone is the guy that Henderson tags to go forward and blaze this path, literally a path, a trail blazer, right? So the wilderness road he builds through the Cumberland Gap or cuts through the Cumberland Gap, quite literally, like they're chopping down trees, they're moving wherever they can and blazing this trail for people to follow. They go just south of the Ohio River. They found Boonesboro. It's named after him. He's the guy. Like he's got the reputation, he's got the name, and people trust him in general. But then they start getting into all kinds of trouble. The first being the land deal that they had struck. So they ostensibly bought it from the Cherokee, right? And in a lot of the books, it says, well, they just didn't know, like they didn't realize that they were buying it from the Cherokee, and the Cherokee didn't own the land. And that's kind of like, in my estimation, buying a PlayStation in a parking lot from someone and being like, well, I thought it was a legitimate deal. It's like, you knew it wasn't a legitimate deal. You still have the PlayStation, but someone's going to be mad about that. So they're stuck with this, or they've got this land. And in their minds, it's like, well, we bought it from somebody, so this is legit. But the Shawnee are not super happy with this because their territory is mainly north of the Ohio River, but this is cutting into their land, substantially. And anything that gets too close, obviously, they know the precedent. As soon as settlements get close, that means that they're, sooner or later going to take over. So what they do is ally with the British, mainly in Fort Detroit. So they go up to Fort Detroit. They say, listen, these guys are encroaching on us. The British say, cool, we can help out with that. They give them a bunch of guns. They give them ammunition. They give them foodstuffs and all sorts of supplies to wage this kind of guerrilla war on Boone and the other settlers that are gradually kind of making their way up the Ohio River. And that is pretty much the only way that they're able to put up an actual threat, because otherwise, And if you're fighting settlers inside of this palisade fort, in which Boonesboro is a palisade fort, so they're surrounded by these wooden log walls, you can dump arrows in there quite a bit, but you're not going to have any real efficacy. It completely changes the game when you're provided with a bunch of free guns and ammunition, muskets in general. But you see this throughout history where guerrilla forces are provided weapons by a third party, and that changes the course of the entire conflict. That's really what happened here. So there's growing tensions from 1775 to 1778, tons of raiding back and forth. And one thing that we didn't get to cover, I thought, enough, it was hard to fit it into the story, is Boone's daughter being kidnapped, because it's 2 years before that, in 1776. Shawnee and Cherokee warriors kidnapped Jemima Boone and two other girls, two Callaway girls. Callaway's a huge figure in the fort at Boonesboro also. It was just, again, hard to fit it into the story, which purists and cynics alike will, uh, have a problem with, but you gotta, keep it concise a little bit. And that's why we have this show. So Boone and a rescue party, Boone's not real happy with that. He organizes a bunch of guys in a rescue party from Boonesboro. They go out, they bring them back. They get Jemima and the other two. Obviously, though, it sets like not a great precedent for his relationship with the Shawnee. Couple years, 1 year later in 1777, there's this Battle of the Blue Licks, which is tougher to say than you would think. Is this kind of turning point for Boone and his relationship with the Shawnee, because that's where he gets kidnapped. Is that right? 1778, sorry. 1778, January of 1778, so almost 1777, right? They need salt. They don't have any salt. They're going to have to go out and find salt. They know that salt is at the Blue Licks. It's off the Licks River, which in my estimation is unfortunately named, but that's just 2020 hindsight, the view from modernity. So they get into a scuffle with the Shawnee. Boone does. Boone goes out into the woods and says, like, listen, I got to feed you guys. You guys stay here, work on getting the salt. I'm going to go get some meat to actually salt. While he's out there, it's always kind of blown my mind that they didn't know at all that the Shawnee were following them, because they've got plenty of experience out in the woods. But then again, it's like, this is what the Shawnee do. This is their bread and butter, right? So to speak. They've been doing this since they were children. Boone has too, but I think it's a little different arena here. So the Shawnee are able to follow them. They catch Boone off guard. A big Shawnee chief named Chief Blackfish takes him prisoner, takes all the men, all the guys who go to get salt. They all get taken prisoner. But they're, in general, you'd get tortured or something bad was happen. Boone's a charismatic guy. So he says, like, listen, let's work something out. I'll help you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll help you hunt and all this stuff. So they say, all right, all right, all right. They adopt everyone into the tribe, basically. And over the next couple of months, they trade some guys off to the British, because they're essentially human currency, right? The British are like, give us some of these guys and we'll ransom them back to the Americans. We'll get some, we'll line our pockets a little bit. We'll maybe line your pockets a little bit. And so they do that. They trade them back to the settlers directly. They trade them to other tribes. We're going to do the same thing, like trade them back to the Boonesboro settlers as hostages. And the one guy that they will not release is Boone. They even take him to Fort Detroit to, kind of translate between themselves and the commander at the fort. And the commander's like, guys, like, you got to let me get Daniel Boone, right? This is like a premier trading card. You got to get this guy. He's a blue chip player. We got to get this guy, worth a lot. And they won't do it. They say, no, 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 this guy's way too valuable. And he's a Shawnee now. And word kind of spreads from there throughout the frontier that he's been sighted wearing Shawnee garb now, right? He's speaking the Shawnee language. He's helping the Shawnee hunt, and he's living with the Shawnee. So suspicions kind of start flaring up, like, what is going on? There's no term Stockholm syndrome at the time, but if they could, describe it, it would meet all these symptoms of Stockholm syndrome. So word just starts to spread, and it doesn't mean everybody believes it, but enough people believe it for it to kind of foster and fester in the minds of the settlers at Boonesboro. And while this happens, the raids are still going on. They're not from the village that Boone is living in, but they're harassing Boonesboro and all the surrounding settlements enough that Boone's wife and other children decide, listen, we basically have, we're relying on the other men at this settlement for all of our protection. We can't keep doing that. We don't feel safe here. So they go back east to the nearest eastern settlement where they've got some more family, and they stay with them. The only person that doesn't leave is Jemima because she's already married. So she stays with her husband and I believe a couple children. So that's all happening while Boone is gone. Boone is, while this is happening, in fact, building a real sense of, comradeship and fidelity with the Shawnee, especially with Blackfish. And there's a lot of contrasting stories as to Blackfish's actual motive for adopting Boone, because he adopts him as like his son. This is my boy now. He lives with my family. This is my dude. Some stories say that Blackfish had a son lost in battle. Some say he was just like thinks Boone's a cool guy. Some say he had a son die from disease of some kind, which none of that would be uncommon, nor would it be uncommon for a member of the tribe to adopt someone to replace a relative that they've lost. But this is over, from January throughout the summer till July, over a 6-7 month period where Boone is living with them, adhering to their cultural norms, wearing their clothes. So this real bond begins to be built. Their hardships are his hardships. Their good times are his good times. And, it's human nature, which is, I've still always found it a little odd, though, because this whole prelude to this is him losing a son to them. He understands that there are different bands and that one band can't be held accountable for the actions of another band, but it's still like, right? Am I wrong on that, chat? Am I wrong on that? A little bit weird that you wouldn't just, totally check out with the Shawnee? Because it's like, bro, you kind of killed my kid, I don't know if YouTube's cool with me saying that, but hopefully. Franchise player, absolutely. But yeah, so Boone still finds a way to, either out of, temperament or necessity, a way to build a bond with these people. So but I should say, not so, when word comes to their village that there's a kind of uprising happen amongst the Shawnee and other tribes in the area, word reaches them that they're all going to amass and attack. Those are two tough ones to say back to back, but amass and attack Boonesboro specifically, and not to, capture hostages, not to get food or ammunition. They want to wipe the settlement out. They want Boonesboro to be no more. And they expect if Boone hears this, he's going to be just as happy as they are because he's a Shawnee now. But he's not. And this, ruminates in his mind for about a month. And he's got to act like everything's cool, right? He decides within this month that he's going to escape, but you can't tell the chief, you can't tell the people, like, I'm going to get out of here and go back to my home. I'm going to go side with my family. So he keeps it on the down low. And at some point in July, he's out with this hunting party of other hostages, but kind of a mix of them and the Shawnee, because like everybody's cool and it's just kind of assumed like these guys are adopted Shawnee, no one's going to take off. But as soon as Boone gets a chance, he bolts, and the Shawnee chase him, because once you do that, like once you've shown that you're going to break ties, they can only assume you're going to side with the enemy. He's going to run back and tell them about the attack that's coming. So they chase him, and it's this 3-day ordeal where Boone's going full like Arnold in Predator. He's hiding in the woods. He's hiding in the mud, hiding amongst the rocks, and still moving his way towards Boonesboro the whole time, which is 50 miles or so. It's a long haul, right? So he finally gets there. He's escaped the Shawnee. He gets to the walls and he's going in his mind, man, I'm going to be the man when I get back here. These people are going to be so happy to see me. My wife and kids are going to be like, this is our dad. This is our dude, right? He's done the impossible and he's come back to save us. and everybody's going to be throwing him a party and super grateful that he saved their lives. But he gets back, his wife and kids are gone. It's just his daughter there, and a lot of these people think that he's a Shawnee now, and this is some kind of setup, some kind of trap. Even when he tells them, like, listen, I'm here to warn you about this huge Shawnee attack coming, they think that he's a double agent, so it's some kind of setup for an attack that's coming at a different time or something like that. He's getting, very little charity from his fellow settlers at this time, because it looks to them like this guy shows up in full Shawnee garb, and it's think about it, if you're like a Patriots fan and you hear that this guy that the guy that used to be the biggest Patriots fan is now out there wearing Buffalo Bills gear or something, right? Let's say Bills. And you think like that's a weird rumor. And then eventually he shows up at your house party and he's got the Buffalo Bills gear on and he's like, guys, I brought back the Buffalo Bills playbook and like this is what they're going to run. You're going to think like, nah, this guy's a Bills fan now. We can't trust him. That's not the right playbook. Something's going on. And that's basically what's going on here. But he thinks he's going to be welcomed as a hero. People are glad to see him, but there's quite a bit of suspicion around him. But after a couple hours, so not a ton of time, couple hours of him going off on these people and saying, listen, like, you got to listen to me. This is a matter of life and death. The Shawnee are coming, and they are coming in a matter of months. And it's not a few, it's hundreds and hundreds of them. And they're not coming to, take your dinner. They're coming to wipe you all out. Eventually, he convinces enough people to start making the fort preparations and all that. So this is the point where I've kind of just recapped how he got to be here, right? This is the point where it gets to be, in my mind, he's definitely not a spy, right? Still a lot of people suspect him. It goes for months of fortifying the fort. And you would think, okay, well, if you're fortifying the fort to this degree, you're not working with the enemy. Like, you're fortifying it from all angles. You're making sure there's no weak points. So in my mind, that's enough proof that you're not working with the other side, right? And one little side point at this, because you see where I'm going. Like, I don't think Daniel Boone's a spy. But one little side point, I do think Squire Boone, cool guy, his brother, little bit of a weirdo, little bit of a, I wish I had an analogy for that. But yeah, just a tinkerer, right? And he did a lot of cool stuff. But while all of this is going on, he's got 80%, 90% good ideas. He's got a water delivery system. He has a number of, he angled the, I didn't get a chance to describe this in the episode super well, but he angled the firing ports on the inside of the firing ports. So if you think about that, on the outside, or on the outside, it's flat. And on the inside, if it's flat, you can only move here and here. But if it's angled, you can move here and way over here. And I'm sure that existed before, but that's a smart innovation to put in there, or smart technology, let's say, to utilize. He angled the roof so that it would be harder for them to catch fire. But he made a cannon out of wood. Like, he assembled a bunch of hollowed out log pieces together and then bound them with a bunch of iron, like hose clamps, like giant hose clamps, right? And it feels like you could look at that and be like, bro, that's not going to work. And I kind of feel like Daniel Boone looked at that and was like, bro, that's not going to work. But you kind of like, just got to let him get one in, right? Because all the rest of his ideas have been pretty good. But that one, he shot it like once during the battle and it exploded and got splinters everywhere. So, broken clocks, right? Twice a day, they're right. But the rest of the time. But I digress again. So Boone sets up all these defenses on the fort, right? So to me, it's pretty obvious that he's not. But even after the warriors show up, there's a lot of, consternation amongst his fellow settlers that, he's going to still turn on us. And they go through this whole battle, this 10-day siege. You think, well, that's enough proof. Still, after that, there was a lot of suspicion that Boone had tipped them off in some way, had set them up somehow. And it's just like, well, why would you fight a 10-day siege? Why would you put yourself through all that? And really, he had the worst, most to risk out of all of them, because the Shawnee specifically knew who he was. Blackfish had come to get him and had come to make him pay. Like he was gonna wipe Boone out first because he had personally, you know, disrespected them, had personally kind of thrown their loyalty to the wayside. So that was Boone had the most to risk, and he still stuck with the settlers. But no good deed goes unpunished. There we go. So even after the fight, Boone gets court-martialed, and we kind of like had to tag this into the episode, but it's like, you know, we got 22 minutes or something already. You guys got things to do. So we didn't get into this a ton, but even after Boonesboro, he gets court-martialed by the Virginia militia, which is like, you're in Virginia, you're a ways away. Maybe like, how would you even know what happened? But enough word got to them that they called Boone back. They court-martial him. And by this point, pardon my French, but he's pissed. So he gives this long diatribe, this long self-defense speech about how, you know, you have no idea what's going on out there. You have no legitimacy in questioning my record. Here's all the things that I've done, and here's all the people in my family that I've lost. And I thought this was a particularly telling point, because let's go over this real quick. How many of the Boones were lost to violence with the Shawnee and the Cherokee specifically? So James Boone, Daniel's eldest son, in 1773, so 5 years before the siege of Boonesboro and 5 years before his capture by the Shawnee, is killed by Shawnee and Cherokee warriors. It's a horrific story. This October of 1773. And we'll probably at some point do an episode on that. It's one of those where you have to use a lot of analogies and flowery language to avoid the YouTube censors. Though we love the YouTube censors. Thank you, YouTube. The party was ambushed. Shawnee and Cherokee just cut Boone's son and a guy named Captain William Russell, cut these guys to pieces. It was really bad. They captured them. They tortured them. Boone knew what happened. He's the one that discovered their bodies. It was a bad deal. So strike one, right? Jemima Boone obviously was captured in 1776. Boone himself obviously captured in 1778. In 1780, 2 years later. So obviously this is post his defense, but you can see moving forward that there's no love lost between Daniel Boone and the Shawnee. 1780, his younger brother Edward killed by the Shawnee. His wife had been attacked but not killed. He lost so many nephews and in-laws to the Shawnee and the Cherokee that there's like not really a lot of records kept about how many and what their name was, but several, right? Like there's several mentions of several Boones being lost and how many there were in various diaries from Jemima and Boone himself and Squire. His son Israel Boone, killed later in an ambush in 17. Let's see, I wrote these notes out, but I wrote them in my less than descriptive style sometimes. Israel died fighting at the Battle of Blue Licks in 1782. It's a precursor to the actual attacking of Blue Licks. So like anywhere he goes, he's reminded of when this is like, oh, this is where my son was attacked. This is where my daughter was kidnapped. He has nothing to gain by siding with the Shawnee. 6 months out of a life does not a reputation make, right? So if you see, it's quid pro quo, right? Like, or no, cui bono, like who benefits? Daniel Boone certainly doesn't. He benefited from faking his loyalty for a certain amount of time, but I don't think there's any evidence nor motive pointing to him being a spy. That is my take. Let's take a look at your guys' take. 81% say no. A lot of smart people in here because you agree with me. We'll take a look at the comments real quick, see if anybody has anything particularly controversial to say. Not yet. Not yet. But good to see everybody engaging there. It's an interesting question, right? It's like something that's fun to toss around. It's, the real tragedy of 17th, 18th, 19th century history is you can't accuse anybody of being a CIA plant. It takes a lot of the fun out of reading and mulling over it. But, still interesting. So let's see. We've got a couple other topics we wanted to jump in today too. We have the Battle of Hungry Hill. So this is one where delving into some research for to put it as a future episode, but I really just learned about it yesterday. So I thought this would be fun to jump into. Happened in Oregon in Southwest Oregon. And all right, I'm a millennial, right? So growing up, the Atari of my time, or the, I don't know, what did Gen X play, Gen Z play? Like whatever they play. They can be kind of strange sometimes, but it's a huge game during my time. Oregon Trail, everybody played it. Probably the seminal computer game of our time, and that's the way we learned a lot of history. And I learned that like you can shoot a lot of elk if you just hang out there for an hour. Don't take the rabbits. Don't waste your ammunition on them. Take out the elk. Anyways, the Oregon Trail lasted for quite a while. It's obviously a seminal American landmark, a time period in America that shaped us as a nation. But it ended, more or less with the battle at Hungry Hill. That's kind of the beginning of the end, where Army forces had been sent to kind of quell this uprising of several tribes in the area, because obviously the tribes don't want them there. It's like one of those things. It's when Americans had first arrived, it was kind of, we can work something out, and then broken treaty after broken treaty after broken treaty, and there eventually comes this uprising where people are pissed, so they start attacking farms and homesteads, and then they start attacking settlers on the trail. So this Army cavalry force, and I think combined infantry force too, is sent out to first find these tribes and then quell them, like bring them on, take away their arms, take away their ability to fight back. And I don't know if they were, I just learned about this, so I don't know if they're trying to move them to reservation lands yet or not. But it's a super creepy story, and it happened on Halloween, which I think makes it even a little bit creepier. But it's just like the worst bunch of stereotype scenarios that you don't want to find yourself in. If I was an army commander at that time, I just have a policy of no canyons. Like, we're just not doing it. We're not going into anywhere where there's steep cliffs on both sides. But wasn't policy yet. And this was, I believe, 1855. Like I said, yeah, 1855. So a lot of the press at the time was covering what's happening in California, like the last vestiges of the gold rush. So a lot of the story from this kind of fell by the wayside in the popular press at the time. But okay, so these army guys, the cavalry infantry, are out there. They start walking into this canyon in southwestern Oregon, and this attack just explodes on them. A bunch of them fall to begin with, and they're left like scrambling up these steep, right about there, steep, muddy cliffs. And these guys are slipping and falling. And it's basically like a literal race for survival, because as they're slipping and falling, they're getting shot from all angles. So the first guys that can get up to the rocks survive. And the rest of them, it's just like a veritable turkey shoot, right? And it's a 2-day battle. The Army takes heavy losses, and the tribes of the area, it's a conglomeration. So I'm not being dismissive in saying tribes of the area. It's a multiple combined force. They just kind of sit in the bushes, take pot shots for 2 days, and then pull back. And at the end of it, it's something that we like never really hear about, but was a turning point in the Oregon Trail. Kind of shut it down, turned political attitudes in the area around. Like, there was no more political will to work with the tribes. Like, it's always seen as, obviously it's always seen at the time as a unmerited assault, and at the time it was. And so southwestern Oregon just explodes at the time, and it's an overlooked area, I think, in American history, because California gets all the press, but Washington and Oregon were frontier towns. It wasn't like coffee shops and art displays, like Portlandia stuff at the time. So it's just an overlooked area in history that this particular battle seemed, we use the word brutal a lot, right? And I get it, but it's because it's kind of the only adjective that describes a lot of this stuff. So a particularly brutal battle, one that definitely look into it before we even put an episode out, because if you're a fan of Old West history, you may not have heard about it before. and it's a really interesting battle. And then one other thing that we're going to be doing coming up is uh, Pompey Factor and the Seminole Scouts, more like the Seminole Scouts in general, because it's like these guys are kind of the, if you're familiar with Vietnam history, they're kind of the LRPs, like the long range ranger patrols. They are kind of a force apart. So even amongst they worked in conjunction a lot with the Buffalo Soldiers. They had kind of this semi-shared heritage and semi-shared culture, but they were a whole nother contingent of guys who had grown up uh, practicing. A lot of times they had Seminole background, so they grew up in the woods. They grew up in outside and tracking and hunting. A lot of times in actual combat with Comanche and Kiowa and Apache, who they were kind of once the Seminole got moved out to Oklahoma, they were just kind of attacked from all sides for decades. So a lot of these guys were experienced in Comanche modes of warfare, Kiowa and Apache. That's kind of, let's just throw that all in under one umbrella for the time being. But they knew how to fight them, and they were veterans of this kind of warfare before the Buffalo Soldiers and the rest of the army arrived after the Civil War. So they're utilized on the front lines. Like these guys were put out into hairy situations, and any occasion where you see 4 medals of honor awarded is almost unheard of. And any occasion, it's very, very rare, not unheard of, but very rare that someone isn't awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, right? Like it's not unheard of, but it's pretty rare. All of these guys were awarded the Medal of Honor, and it's one of those stories where it's when you imagine it, it's I think akin to maybe um, something like close quarters fighting in maybe Mogadishu, where it's just like wave after wave of people coming, and it just gets closer and closer and closer for hour after hour, and every problem that can come your way is besieging you, right? It's you've got a critically wounded officer, you're running low on ammunition, you're running low on water, you're running low on food, and it's basically at the time, if you're doing a solid analysis of American forces in general, one of the few, if not the only forces that could have survived this event and adapted to the northern Mexico landscape that they were working in, because there's just nothing there, and you're always exposed. You're chasing an enemy that can dissolve into the landscape, and they were the only guys that could really find the Comanche. And really, that is half the battle of frontier warfare, because it's you can have the greatest force in the world, but if you can't find your opponent, it's all for naught. And the biggest problem that they run into, whether it's Custer's campaign or Ranald McKenzie's campaign or the Buffalo Soldiers fighting kind of from mid to South Texas and then on west, was actually finding the tribes, because if they didn't want to be found, there was very little that they could do without employing native scouts. That's why there's so many native scouts that fought under Custer, because they just had long running feuds with other tribes, and they were more than happy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So they're more than happy to go track these guys down with a superior force and mow down their enemy so they don't have to deal with these guys anymore. Um, so yeah, the Seminole Scouts are, I think, highly overlooked. Another aspect of, they often get lumped in with the Buffalo Soldiers, and it's like it's fair, it's a fair uh, 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 co-assignment, right? But it's also kind of shortchanges the Scouts and gives you kind of a distorted view of the Buffalo Soldiers. And both forces were just like revolutionary in Army history, because the Buffalo Soldiers had a real desire to prove themselves. So this kind of they were absolutely highly regarded even 5 years after this, contentious Civil War. Um, they kind of rocketed to a high level of respect. Um, but I think they're often overlooked. A lot of their battles overlooked, and it's overlooked like how hard these guys fought, because they wanted to be considered, uh, you know, uh, loyal or deserving members of respect and or deserving members of our society. So it's the Battle of Eagle Pass. Definitely check that one out. And let's see, what's our final one here? I got a list, but let's see. Can't keep it all in my head. Got a big head, but it ain't that big. What do I have listed here? How's everybody doing tonight? Everybody's team win. We got a lot of college football fans. Anybody have any other topic suggestions for moving forward? And how did everybody like the history fighting championships? We got a lot of good feedback from that. That was fun to do. Not as easy as you would think, but fun to do. Gave me a lot of respect for, Daniel Cormier, Joe Rogan et al. Really, Jim Brown's the greatest UFC announcer in history because he did it like first, right? The first UFCs, if you haven't watched them, go watch them because Jim Brown, the football player, right? Legendary football player, he's an announcer and he uses these great phrases all the time. Somebody got bit in one of the fights. This was just like there was no rules in these first ones, right? And somebody got bit. And Jim Brown said sometimes a human bite is more deadly than an animal. And he didn't flinch when he said it. And you're just like, what a line, man. What a line. Let's see here. So yeah, if you haven't watched that, go watch that. It wasn't 200 years ago when you only knew to fight the death. It's hard to imagine. We seem so distant. Okay, it wasn't 200 years ago when you and yeah, it wasn't but 200 years ago when you and all your neighbors would have to fight to the death to defend your village. It's hard to imagine when we seem so distant from that violence. True. Yeah, it's something that I think, life's not easy today, but it's underestimated like how close these battles were and what was at stake. And now everybody knew what was at stake. They knew, if you lose this fight, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose your life, and you're going to lose everything that you've built. So, and it was the same for the natives. It was like, if you lose this fight, you're going to lose your homelands, you're going to lose your livelihood. It was everything on the line every time. But I think this story illustrates how it was very amorphous. It was the loyalty shifted depending on, what treaties were struck, what deals were struck, and what was the primary enemy in the territory. History needs to be told. Absolutely. Love the history fights. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, that'd be one thing to go over here. I've got a bunch of matchups. So our next matchups, I think we're going to be running these Tuesday night is the tentative showing or the tentative date for our next one. Let's see. So our next matchups are going to be, these are going to be some good ones. These are going to be some good ones. Abraham Lincoln versus Teddy Roosevelt. Very interesting matchup. Teddy was pretty fluid in judo, pretty well trained in boxing. Abraham Lincoln, legit regarded as a good catch wrestler. So I think that's going to be an interesting, possibly brutal matchup. We've got George Washington versus King George. Could be surprising. I don't know. I think a lot of people underestimate King George. I love America. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying we might see a better fight there than you would anticipate. And what is our third one? I had a list here. When you go live, this is what happens. Don't fully blame Bill O'Reilly for going off. It's a tough gig. And we've got next one. It'll be a surprise for the third fight. It'll be a surprise. That's what you got to tune in for. All right. Any other topics tonight? Anybody have any questions? I got one more thing to cover. Any questions in here? Thank y'all for showing up too. It's fun to just like hang out, have a good time on a Saturday night. His life is full of tragedy. I need to stop complaining so much about my little problems. You and me both, but I don't plan to. I've heard of wooden canoes being used in battle before, but they usually only last a few shots. Yeah, that's true, except in the case of the Tlingit. That was a good episode. If you haven't seen our Alaska episodes, go check those out. The Battle of Sitka 1802 and the Battle of Sitka 1804 were huge in Alaska in history, huge in Russian history. And it was really interesting how they were able to withstand so many shots. They're really thick canoes. and they just massed them. There were so many of them, but they didn't take that many shots because the Russians ended up winning. Let's see. Which is funny too. It's odd. Like the Russians had to sail like a couple hundred miles, and they're just like, we're at Alaska. Even now, I think they're like 50 miles apart at their closest point. King George is going down on this one. I hate to, I mean, we never know, right? You don't know till fight night. They're always one power punch away. Everybody's got a slugger's chance. All right, let's see. I watched an account of Boone on the History Channel, and they never mentioned him going native. Yeah, and I don't know why, because that's not a controversial thing to talk about. It just shows the depth and the kind of the complexity of the frontier at the time. We just view it as, no pun intended, but we just view it as so black and white, and we view it, through the lens of Hollywood, which is understandable. But it was, like I said, so amorphous. It was, you would be allied with one tribe, you might be allied with one band of one tribe, and complete enemies with the other band from the same tribe. It was just always shifting as whatever it took, right, to survive. That's what you did. It was like today. It's just nothing is as cut and dried as it seems when you're dealing with people. Let's see, anything else in here? How frustrating would it be to get back and you're pretty much an outcast? For real, absolutely. It's like Jordan returning to the Bulls, right? And like he finally was accepted back too. How many kids are in? How many kids of offspring do you think Daniel Boone had? Not sure, but I mean, by this point, I'm sure a couple hundred people could say that they have a connection to Daniel Boone. Like everybody says, oh, I have a connection to Charlemagne, and then a lot of people in China, Mongolia today would say, oh, I have a connection to Genghis Khan, and it's like, yeah, because there's like hundreds of thousands of them at this point. The, you know, matrix or whatever, the branches just keep spreading out, and after several centuries, like they've gotten out pretty far. And it's kind of like, well, what do you want? Like a hat? Like we all have ancestors from somewhere. Watch the Boone history thing. Yeah, so speaking of watching the Boone history thing, this will bring me to my last thing. Tomorrow, which I think this will be really fun. We're going to be doing a watch party of sorts on the Revenant, the 2015 movie. If you're a fan of this kind of history, you've more than likely seen it, and you more than likely have an opinion on it. So we're going to kind of be answering: does the revenue suck? Does it suck? Is this movie just no good at all? Could be true. I don't know. We're going to dive into that tomorrow. It's free on YouTube, right? So you can watch along with me. I can't show you the movie or play the sound for you because it will get flagged. But we're going to watch the whole thing. If it gets like really slow, we'll skip ahead a little bit. But we're going to pick it apart. And there's a lot of things, just to be upfront, you probably know if you like this kind of history, but there's a lot of things wrong with it. You didn't have a kid. It didn't end the way they portray it. And there's just a lot of things in between. I really feel like they turned a story of forgiveness and a story of obviously survival and a story of grace into a story of revenge and vengeance, right? So we'll be diving into that. And we'll be watching along. I highly encourage you to watch along, but you don't really need to. It'll be a fun way to kind of go through a movie and just to hang out. And nothing's more fun than kind of making fun of something, right? How can you have fun if you don't make fun? So yeah, we'll be going through that. I highly encourage you to watch along. It's another different thing that we haven't done before. We're just trying all kinds of stuff, see what you guys enjoy, what you don't. And then we'll be having, obviously, the next History Fight Club, like I said, should be Tuesday. So we'll be getting that out. Then we should have another episode. The episode actually might come out on Tuesday, and we might do the Fight Club on Wednesday. So we'll keep you posted on that, though, for sure. Yeah, what do you guys think about The Revenant? Let me know in the chat. Honestly, I thought DiCaprio did a good job acting. I thought like all the costumes, I thought the initial attack was pretty cool. But a lot of it, like they're kind of using an amalgamation of characters, which is fine, but they go a little too dramatic and far with some of the guys, some of the characters, and they portray a lot of a lot of attacks that didn't happen. Like spoiler alert, like right, but he didn't ride his horse off of a cliff, and he's not Luke Skywalker. He didn't cut the horse open and sleep inside of it. Tuesday night, new fight night. Yeah, if let me know. Like I could run a poll and see like what nights are best for everybody to watch. Yeah, it's good entertainment. The movie's good entertainment, not necessarily historically accurate. But I guess that's like a little hypocritical for me to say as a guy that runs hypothetical MMA fights. However, I think the way that we portray them is the way that they would actually unfold, right? Yeah, let me know your opinions on The Revenant and maybe suggest some other movies because I've got like a long list of movies that I think this would be a good concept for. Dances with Wolves, The Searchers. I'm like Axl Rose having to adjust my mic all the time. The Searchers, The Unforgiven. Oh, there's a bunch of them. The Comancheros. I'm partial to John Wayne. What are other ones we? Oh, 310 to Yuma and Hostiles. Not all of these I've checked already. Not all of these are free on YouTube. I thought it'd be good to start with The Revenant because it's free. You can jump right in and follow along. Great fight scenes in The Revenant. That's true. They really did convey the intensity of the fights really well because it's like I said before with the Shawnee and the Frontiersmen, everything was pretty much a zero sum game. Like they're going to win or you're going to win. And if they win, you better hope that they take you out because we talk a lot about Comanche tortures and some about Apache tortures, but in a lot of ways, the East Coast tribes and the Northern tribes the Northern Plains tribes had more elaborate forms of torture that took a lot longer. And they really, all right, how do I say this politely? It was a very popular form of entertainment for them, right? Like the Romans crucifying people in the Colosseum. I mean, they dug it. It was like, network TV for them, which is like pretty gruesome, but I don't know. If you don't have TV, I guess you got to watch something. But anyways, um, yeah, they knew if they got captured, it was going to be a bad deal. So the intensity of the movie, it carries really well. It does present all these guys who were real life guys in, a lot of situations that they were really in, but it adds so much. I thought adding the sun to it was just like, why do we need this? It's a dramatic enough story as it is. And his son's like kind of a wuss, right? I might be out of bounds saying that, but his son's kind of a wuss. Kind of just like Hugh Glass is your dad and you turned out like this. I don't know. Right? Somebody affirm that in the chat for me. But yeah, we'll be watching the movie. If you haven't seen it, there's going to be a lot of spoilers, but I feel like it makes the film better. So watch ours first. Let's see. Yeah, any movie suggestions? Toss them in here. Like I said too, we're kind of wrapping up, but I'll throw the links for any of the episodes that I've talked about in the description below. And that way they're like really easy to find. Kind of going over looking over the chat real quick. Oh yeah, and one of our episodes coming up. I mentioned this last time, but I'm still kind of like piecing it together. Whether or not the Texas Rangers are the Old West equivalent of Delta Force. I think that's going to be a really cool concept coming up. So kind of mill that around in your own mind because I want like a lot of engagement on that because that's a not necessarily controversial opinion, but I think everybody will have some thoughts on that. And we're going to be covering stuff like top tens and top fives and going over some of maybe the more not gruesome, but some of the more visceral details that we can't fit into the episodes. And also one thing we're thinking about doing, this is kind of we're kind of all just hanging out here. But one thing I'm thinking about doing is adding maybe a $1 membership a month, maybe $1.99. It's the economy, but for a special extra episode. So once a month, we'll give you a substantial episode that either we can't cover on YouTube or maybe we just think is really cool that, we want to offer to members. So yeah, another thing to think about. Let us know if you're in the comments and stuff. Is that something you'd be interested in? We might run a poll for that sometime this week. Well, Chuck Norris wasn't. Well, wasn't Chuck Norris in the Delta Force movie? True, which I think was kind of the first public iterations of Delta Force. They really didn't know what it was before. You really like you weren't even supposed to say Delta Force. Delta Force. It wasn't. It technically didn't exist, right? It's off the books, and it's changed its name. They have changed their name a million times, even in the last 20 years. But they are a rather unique force, even in the tier one echelon, and they're capable of lots of stuff that I think the Rangers were kind of an old world, old west iteration of precursors in a lot of ways. And there's several precursors to the to Delta Force, but so many of these parallels are just like if you know anything about both of them, it's hard not to kind of nerd out on. Oh yeah, I think he was. Yeah, Chuck was in Delta Force. Now what a movie, right? They had rockets on a dirt bike. That's a powerful recruiting tool. If I was an 18-year-old in like 1985, I would be down at the recruiting office asking, where do I sign up for the guy who shoots rockets from a dirt bike? Just going over the chat here. Oh, yeah. And if you want to learn more about Daniel Boone, I swear I can't stop this thing. I got a nice desk, right? It's a heavy desk. I hauled it up 3 flights of stairs. It's like 300 pounds, let's say. So I deadlifted it up, but it's heavy, it's substantial. And no matter what I do, it gives like the earthquake effect, but it just adds a little excitement. But yeah, interesting to know there's a direct lineage from Texas Rangers to Delta Force. It's more like a bunch of parallels, but it's kind of two forces born of necessity. And there's a very stringent selection process, though that means different things for both forces. But their mission set is, different. There's different times. They're in different times, so they have different things to work with. But they're both essentially stood up as hostage rescue forces and direct action forces. So they're able to take small groups of guys into hostile territories and recapture hostages specifically. Like that's what they're stood up to do. They're not supposed to go out there and take on a line of 400 warriors at a time. They're supposed to go out, strike small, get the hostage, bring them back. And there's a very small group of guys, and really their selection was combat. It was like, we'll take you out. It's trial by combat. And if you survive, then you're good at this. And if you don't, then you're not so good at this. But that's more or less until the 1840s how they trained. And so it became more and more refined, but it became this kind of Darwinism where they were just kind of weeded out over the course of maybe 6 months in service. A 50% casualty rates is what I read. So a very dangerous job. And they had a lot of times the best weaponry, like they were over, probably then within a decade, they were able to leverage a lot of political connections to get some of the best revolvers, the Colt revolver. They actually went to Colt, and Samuel Walker did, and helped put some refinements on the revolver. Actually made it a 6-shot revolver without the detachable cylinder. So that flip down mechanism is a direct result of Samuel Walker. And that's a common thing in Delta Force. Like they work with armorers, and a lot of progression that you see in firearm technology starts in that unit because they request specific things, whether it's like red light optics, suppressors, all kinds of stuff. So a lot of parallels that I thought would be very interesting. Yeah, 50% casualty rate. And obviously that's an estimate, but let's say it's half of that, 25% casualty rate. So for every 4 guys that go out, one of them's not coming back. That's a tough business. God made men, Colt made men equal, right? I think Colt is the name that, stands out, but it's the Walker Colt, right? And Walker was such an instrumental guy, not only in standing up the Rangers, but in going to New York on his own dime, making these adjustments because he just thought my guys in the field need these changes. We can't be pulling out cylinders while we're riding on a horse and then reloading them 5 shots at a time. It's an improvement from single shot, but there's a lot of problems with it still. So he went up there, made these changes, sat down with Colt. They went over in New York City, went over these plans for how they could make it better. And he eventually returned to Texas and fought in the Mexican American War. And it was like, I think months later, he was dead. And that was it. But his lineage carries on in the Walker Colt. And I've heard it called the Colt Walker revolver and the Walker Colt, but I just feel like Walker Colt is easier to say. Do you think Delta studies the Rangers? Yeah, I think they do. And obviously the United States Army Rangers are kind of a feeder force in a lot of ways for the tier one unit. Now, it's an easier, probably gets me in less trouble than saying Delta Force. So the tier one Army unit is the Rangers are a feeding force for that. And the Rangers themselves take a lot from the Texas Rangers, being a force that can go out, operate relatively independently. And in the Rangers case, they can hold positions. The Rangers did move out on the frontier, hold positions in the form of forts, which would be like modern day fire bases, right? So, and in both cases, they are forces that range, right? Which is like where the term ranger came from, which does predate the Rangers by, I think, centuries. There was rangers in Europe that were sent out to range the territory and find and drive off trouble. But I think it was with the Texas Rangers that technology of close quarters battle and guerrilla warfare, just you see that the ability just and their capabilities just rocket forward within a decade. And that's really why they were involved in the Mexican American War, because they were just a much different force, kind of like the Seminole War, the Seminole Scouts. They were a different breed of cat than your average soldier. They weren't really even familiar with standard tactics, but they could do things and go places and, fight in a way that was super valuable in these guerrilla conflicts, which were basically wholly unfamiliar to the United States Army at the time, more or less. But yeah, so that's a really interesting concept. We'll dive into that more later, but and also, if you want a cool deep dive before that live stream, look into the life of Charlie Beckwith. He's the guy who stood up Delta Force. And a lot of parallels between himself and some early Rangers. Just a boisterous guy, fearless in a lot of ways, and his whole deal, which I think was a big thing for the Rangers, a turning point for the Rangers and a turning point for the U.S. Army and their special operations alike, was that we got to take the fight directly to the enemy, whoever the enemy may be, right? But our tactics of holding ground and fighting for a long time, or a siege warfare, whatever that may be, has to go by the wayside because it's not working. We have to take the fight directly to the enemy. We have to overwhelm them with firepower and tactics, and then get out of there. And that was a relatively novel concept in 1840, and then it's a relatively novel concept again in the late 1970s. Is there a Texas Ranger Museum? Yeah, there is. It's in Waco. And I haven't been yet, but it is supposed to be fantastic. I believe it's in Waco. If I'm wrong on that, somebody can correct me. And yeah, just before I hop off, and you can let me know in the comments later, but does anybody have any suggestions for your favorite Western that you'd like to see us cover in like a watch party, like we're going to do The Revenant tomorrow? My voice is getting tired. These Texas allergies, I think I said it last time. Man, if you're looking to move to Texas, think about it. We got a lot of people here already, so think about it. Everybody's really mulling over their movie choices. All right, one last look through the chat here. All right. Let's see. Excuse me. Had manners enough to say excuse me. You know how embarrassing it is to burp on a live stream? Very. Let's see. Not that I know for free to watch. They don't have to be free to watch because, I mean, they're I think $2 or $3 to rent on YouTube. But yeah, think about it. We'll have a next live stream. We'll have another live stream before we, we'll have tomorrow's live stream. So hop in the chat again and If you can think of any, let me know. All right. I think we're getting to the end of the comments here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much again for tuning in. Like these are really fun for me to do. It's fun to get in and talk with you guys and go over some of the more minute details. Like I said last stream, I think like you guys oftentimes know way more than I do. So if you have anything to pitch in, always feel free to let me know. Great stream, Pennsylvania Plowboy. Thanks, man. Thank you again for being here. Pet Detectives Adventures. Thank you so much for being here. Short Stories by Kate. Thank you so much for being here. Pet Detectives Adventure is actually a really cool kids channel. So if you have kids, go check that out. Was he? Oh, what's up, Blue Kachina 220? You get it. You know who I'm talking to. Was he a traitor? I missed it. No. Long story short, no, we don't think so. There'd just be no like real benefit in him being a traitor. His track record proves him right. And as I said at the beginning, haters gonna hate, right? And if you're the boss man, everybody wants to be the boss man, right? Until you're the boss man, then everybody's got a problem with you. Everybody's got something to say. And Boone was the boss man. And we really didn't cover his later life. We didn't really have a lot of time to get into that. Well, I guess we have time, right? But I don't have the expertise yet to get into that. I was kind of focused on his time with Boonesboro and his hardships there. But man, it hardly got easier for him from there on out. And he lived to be almost 90. He lived a long time. Okay, we'll check him one more time. Anybody else? Any questions before we take off? Then I'm going to do the whole Johnny Carson sign off. All right, cool. Thank you all again so much for tuning in. We'll have another one tomorrow. Make sure you're there for that. That's going to be a fun one. And we'll be doing these quite a bit. So stay tuned. Stay tuned this week. We got 2 episodes coming up, and then we just got a bunch of stuff coming up. We're going to be hitting you left, right, and center from here through New Year's, right? So stay tuned, and we will see y'all later. Thanks again, and have a good night. Bye.